The School of Visual Arts acknowledges that the campus resides on unceded Indigenous lands, specifically the Lenape-Hoking, or the land of the Lenape. The main Lenape meeting place, the Kintakoying, or Crossroads of Three Nations, was located near Astor Place, just blocks away from SVA's present campus, before their forced migrations which began in 1626. The School of Visual Arts acknowledges that colonial narratives have overpowered and often shielded mainstream recognition of the historic and continual displacement of Native people by the United States. SVA recognizes its ethical obligation as an educational institution to offer resources that shed light on accurate depictions of history. This acknowledgement indicates a commitment to confronting genocide, displacement, and the erasure of Indigenous peoples, while recognizing that land acknowledgement is only a starting point for dialogue, relationships, and informed action. In an effort to gather resources about the perseverance of Indigenous communities as they relate to our mission as an art library, the SVA Library has created a subject guide about contemporary artists native to the Americas. We will continue to build on this resource and others.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Wow, we have people in the house. Thank you so much for physically coming to SVA Theatre. I'm your host for tonight, Valerie Smaldone, and we can't express how thrilled we are that we're actually in this house. We're also streaming live, so those of you watching at home or wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us tonight for this 5th annual Art and Activism presented by the Division of Continuing Education at the School of Visual Arts. And tonight we have another very special evening. We've done 4 of these. Last year was completely virtual, which was also exciting to produce, but this year we're in-house and we have a panel and presenters of extraordinarily accomplished people to talk about what it means to be home. What is home? What is a house? What does this mean? But before I talk a little bit about that, I do want to acknowledge the folks who have put this together, the Division of Continuing Education at the School of Visual Arts. And that would be Stephanie McGovern. Stephanie, say hi. There's Stephanie. Karen Moskovich. Karen, take a bow. The Executive Director of the Division of Continuing Education, Joseph Cipri. And Nika Lopez, who's been amazing to coordinate all this, and Michael Billsborough in the corner is doing social media. So I think we have a phenomenal staff, a fanatic and phenomenal staff to make this happen tonight. And once again, thank you so much. Those of you who came get the benefit of a swag bag. Did you all get your swag bag? Okay. In the swag bag is a card, a postcard and a pen or pencil. Should you have any questions for our presenters, our panel tonight, please feel free to write them down and we will collect them later because all of them will come back on this stage to discuss. If you're watching at home, you can ask your questions on Facebook and Michael is moderating. He will know who that is and what the questions are. So we're all connected tonight. We're all about being connected. You know, in the past we've had a little reception outside, a little sparkling wine before people come in and a little bit of wine and cheese afterwards. We can't do that tonight. Doesn't matter. We're here and we're so excited to be part of this evening with you. One of the things that we did to make this program happen in the last year has been quite interesting. The Division of Continuing Education put together a special course for high school students from the New York area in animation. And we wanted to know how these young people felt about our Earth, the climate crisis, toxicity, misuse of water, the fact that our stewardship of this Earth has gone askew. And originally, we were supposed to meet in person. I was part of the staff. We had a person teaching screenwriting, animation, voiceover for those who use voice, sound. It didn't happen because of obvious reasons, but the course continued. And it happened virtually. And these students got together every Sunday with us, and we learned together, and we taught them. They were very talented to begin with, animation and story. So tonight, we're going to be seeing that film coming up in a moment. But first, I really want you to see and hear their voices. We put together a trailer, and we heard their hopes, their dreams, and their deepest concerns for the perilous times that we're in. So let's take a look right now at the trailer of these students and their works.
There's so much to say and so little I can say. There's the plastic in our food.
Storms are getting heavier.
Large fossil fuels emissions.
There's the permafrost melting.
Places are flooding.
There are so many factories around minority communities.
Is what the government and these companies doing morally correct? Are they like lying straight to my face?
The trash. It has been by far one of the biggest issues in New York.
There's a lot of misinformation that's come about, and because of this, people don't really understand the severity and the complexity of these issues.
A lot of people are still in denial about climate change.
Either not believing in climate change or not doing anything about climate change.
This isn't just a problem with nature and pollution. This is also about how we live and how people are treated.
My animation is about lobbying companies that hurt the environment.
It's about a boy. The world around him is covered in pollution.
Water consumption and wasting precious water, essentially affecting the carbon footprint.
Portrayal of how the earth belongs to all of its creatures.
I want to achieve awareness with people knowing how much waste they create.
My film takes the perspective of a child, show the audience that not everyone really knows about climate change.
There'll be lots of cats, lots of dogs, and lots of people.
If everyone works together, I think that's the solution to get everyone to believe and help.
These younger generations are our future. It should be up to us to show a world that can keep on living.
Our world is coming to an end so fast when it has so much to do, and we need to change that.
Never be afraid of using your art to express these issues.
Using my art as a platform and being able to spread it online is a way to get people talking.
Is to show the climate change crisis by, doing what I love.
Art can transcend and can live longer than all of us and can really show a difference in the world.
So that gives you an idea of their deepest thoughts, and Marty Abrahams was so instrumental in putting this together, actually interviewing the students to get their audio, and it was wonderful. Thank you so much, Marty, for doing that. I'd like to introduce our partner in this endeavor, which is Solar One. This organization serves to inspire and inform people about how to care for the planet in many different ways. Bruno Escada is so instrumental in the program that we put together. Bruno, come on up. You can hop up there. You can take the stairs, whatever works for you. You can use the podium right there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
This is on. Oh, hey. Hey, everybody. My name is Bruno Estrada. I am a bilingual solar associate at Solar One. Back when we started working on this program with SVA, I was an educator, so I worked in K through 12 and also with a workforce program. And that last question was very important, what can you do? How can we make things better? For me, growing up in a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood in Queens, it was how can I get my people involved? For a long time, we've been kind of pushed aside, having others make decisions for our communities. And so Solar One is a nonprofit that goes into high schools and elementary schools to teach students about all these different changes. And so we brought our style of teaching to SVA. I had a couple of great sessions with these students where we spoke about all these issues from a macro perspective to a micro perspective to their individual feelings about it. It was very eye-opening to see how some of these folks, through the short amount of time that we had already all these different things that they wanted to say, something that I didn't necessarily see when I was a student myself. So that's something that's very important. And they transferred all that energy into the films that we're going to see pretty soon. But there are still things as you're watching this that you can do. If you have or know of folks in your neighborhood, you can always have conversations with them. You can always reshare some of these like short films that you can see. And there are also other things that you can do. As of a part of my new job, my new role with Solar One, I run a solar campaign which promotes and supports low to moderate income homeowners in acquiring solar on their rooftop at a reduced price. So if you know any homeowners in Brooklyn, you can send them my way. There's also a postcard in your little bag as well. But with all that being said, I'm super proud of what I've seen so far, and I'm super excited to share with you guys all these new films. So I think we're about ready to check some of these out. I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you.
have the students who worked for this period of time and put their animated films together that became this compilation. I'd like to bring up to the stage Marty Abrahams, who was instrumental in making this happen. Also, Courtney Vaneda and Charisse Robinson, myself, we were on the staff. I don't think Courtney is here, but want to thank her and Charisse and myself, I guess, for being part of this. Just a quick question for you. Come on into the light. We need the light. What I want to know, Marty, is what was it like working with these students and getting their voices?
The students came to the class with their own vision, and they all had their own messages to express the issues of climate change, and also offer not only what is wrong with what's going on, but also to offer solutions. They had a very short time to produce these films, and they were able to really just take it and run. Of course, with the help of yourself, Charisse, Courtney, and surely Joe and Nika and Karen from Continuing Ed, we were able to really get incredible results.
Well, the proof is in the pudding. Thank you for all the hard work that you did and for also getting their voices in the trailer. Thanks, Marty. Thank you. One thing.
Yeah, I truly believe the artist is the voice of reason for their generation, and art really transcends the issues, and really it's truly an animation. The outreach is tremendous. The results are really wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marty, for all the hard work you did. And the students, I'm going to say their names quickly. Adriana Gonzalez, Melanie Shi, Daniela Croland, Joyce Chen, Namiko Kechi, Silviana Marty, Justin Lam, Ugochukwu Unora, Christina Adeyemi, Evan Chen, Jacob Updike, Maud Lehman, Una Sumatomo, and Daisy Loyola. Thank you all for participating. They did great work. And you're the future. You're going to make the world better. So thank you. Today we're talking, yes, give them a round of applause. Why not? Why not? Because they're probably watching at home. And home is the topic today. What is home? What is it? Is it a physical being? Is it a house? Is it a community? Certainly it's our earth. And we look at all aspects of what home is today. And on a really spiritual level, our first speaker is Dr. Jarvis Watson, who is new to SVA, and I'm very delighted to introduce Dr. Watson, who is the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at SVA. Dr. Jarvis Watson is a change agent for diversity, equity, and inclusion. For over 18 years, he has dedicated his time, expertise, and creativity toward programs and initiatives for access, awareness, and opportunity. We are delighted to have you at SVA. Dr. Watson, come on up. Let's move this away for you. There you go.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, everyone. All right, good evening. Okay, I know somebody's in the house. Good evening. Okay, like I said, my name is Dr. Jarvis Watson, and I'm the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at SVA. My pronouns are he, him, his. I would like to thank Karen Moskovich, Joe Cipri, Nika Lopez, Valerie Smaldone, and Stephanie, who hooked me up with a nice bag. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and the rest of the crew that's here tonight. It's an honor for me to be a part of an esteemed panel of speakers, creators, and game changers, and I'll definitely add the students who made those films as part of those game changers, those who are changing the world in such a positive way. I wanted to show my appreciation for the land acknowledgement too, Valerie, at the beginning of the program. This month is actually National Indigenous Peoples Month, which recognizes the legacy, plight, and the thriving history of those that self-identify as indigenous nations, peoples, and cultures. Let us begin with how I personally define home. For me, home is more than a physical space. I think Valerie talked about that before. Luther Vandross actually sang a song that has claimed that a house is not a home unless, I heard somebody go, okay, unless there's someone there waiting for you, all right? And I'm probably paraphrasing. I don't want to sing like Luther because I don't want to do him any injustice. But when I think of home, I think of songs, I think of food, okay, family gatherings, lessons that were taught in the kitchen, sense of peace, The anticipation of being in extended homes, as I'm not sure if anybody else has family down south, but I remember my dad had this big Cadillac, and every summer we used to take these long rides down south, and I'd be in the back of a Cadillac just anticipating what it's going to be like when I actually wake up, because we used to travel at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. But the anticipation of having another type of home and with my southern relatives. But after recently being married, I can add to my definition, my wife and I just watching movies on the couch. That's home for me, you know? Home is a sacred place that I carry with me always. When I'm home, I'm restored. I want to take this moment to extend the definition of home, healing, and the heart through the respective lenses of Indigenous nations, their people, and their leaders. I was telling my good friend Sloan, about 10 years ago, I attended a conference called NCORE, National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education, out in San Francisco. This is an international conference that gathers great minds and scholars together to discuss issues of diversity and disparities, but not without solutions. One of the keynote speakers, Mr. Daniel Wildcat, was a member of the Muskogee Nation of Oklahoma, the director of American Indian Studies at the University of Lawrence in Kansas. I'm not sure what he's doing right now, but at the time, he was a highly regarded speaker and educator. Part of his introduction addressed how Native American people engage with each other and how the desocialization of our nation due to technology is creating an environment where we don't even look at each other in the eye anymore, especially throughout the span of the day. Think about it. When's the last time you thought of, when you actually engaged somebody in conversation when you went to 7-Eleven, when you went to go buy gas, or when you went shopping? With your cell phone, even with your debit card, you don't have to even lift your head up most of the time. You just kind of do transactions, and it's really, you don't have to see anyone most of the day. I think with Zoom, we see each other through the different squares right now, so it's a different type of desocialization. But as it pertains to our natural resources, he has claimed that we are destroying this earth, our home, because we treat resources like objects or things, as opposed to respecting our resources like we respect our relatives. Based on his culture, he said resources such as water, trees, soil, minerals, etc. are not called resources, they're called relatives. I'll say it again, they're called relatives. It's all about perspective and how you relate to those things that you hold dear to you. If you treat resources in the same way that you treat a parent, a guardian, uncle, or aunt, then maybe we wouldn't be in the position that we are certainly in now, as the students have just showed us. However, just like most relatives, you don't invite every relative to holiday functions. I'm sure that everyone in this audience can think of at least one relative that creates a distinct dynamic when they show up to a family function. If you need a minute to think about this person, you just let that sink in for a second, all right? But Mr. Wildcat personified his relationship with the earth or home through the example of the relationship he had with his uncle. His uncle, who he revered, had a great car, and he hoped that one day to drive it. His relationship with his uncle was so great, by the time he was old enough and bold enough to ask his uncle for the keys, the uncle had no problem handing them over to him. The relationship with his uncle was built on time and trust. They invested time in each other. When it was time to ask a relative for a favor or a benefit, there was enough history between the two of them that had been established that it was not a second thought for the uncle to pass something over to him. The climate of their relationship within their home was intact. I would say within the past few years, our home lives and lifestyles have been disrupted by global health, social, and cultural pandemics. Based on our cultural relationship, based on our current relationship with our relative or our resources, how will we describe the condition of our homes? Are we in a position to hand down traditions filled with lessons of respect and reverence for the resources that we hold dearly? How is this relevant to our discussion tonight? Tonight, I wanted us to reflect on how our relationships with the resources that we have within ourselves and the resources that we identify as our neighbors have affected the home climates within our respective and overlapping communities. Our ability or inability to see the humanity in each other has been disrupted for some time. Our intentionality to preserve and appreciate the beauty of the human connection has been compromised, and it's hard to trust the person next to you. And part of the challenge is not being able to trust a person that you see in the mirror. COVID-19 forced us to pause and see each other. Race, ethnicity, ethnicity, position, status, geographic location didn't matter to COVID. In the most universal way, COVID reminded us that we are human, we are vulnerable, and that we need each other. Now, I would like to discuss affairs of the heart, or what we call the human spirit. I may use them interchangeably as we talk throughout this evening. Although COVID took many lives and we had a lot of loss, I saw something within the human spirit or the human heart that gave me hope. I witnessed countless acts of selflessness within our communities. And this is a question to the audience and to the folks here. Does anyone remember people developing creative ways of recognizing and appreciating the sacrifice that essential workers were making and still are making while they took care of our loved ones? Does everybody remember that? You know, people shining lights and clapping and then showing really a lot of love for that because we knew what their sacrifice was about. Do you remember how teachers in our school systems turned their homes into centers for learning? Calculus was being taught next to the chicken defrosting in the sink. Do you remember while people were confined in their homes, they found ways to create connections and even start new businesses to address the needs of those that were the most vulnerable at this particular time? For me, I was inspired by the human ingenuity and resilience that makes us great, the human heart. But like any good party, there are always one or two relatives that try to ruin the fun. All right, remember we talked about people that, you know, just don't want to invite to that holiday party? All right, here enters the cousins, structural and systemic racism in a form of police brutality. If I had a slide, I could show you the countless number of names within the past 10 years of young black people lost to police violence and brutality. Like Trayvon Martin, George Floyd reminded us that there is a system that produces and protects those that mean to control and disrupt the lives of historically underserved and marginalized groups. In a second wave of Black Lives Matter, people from all over the globe had enough. They said enough. They took to the streets in unprecedented numbers. 3 letters, BLM, found its way to the streets of France, Germany, Belgium, and different countries within Africa. A global racial reckoning took place, and the world stood with our people and demanded change. The fight still continues. Just like Mr. Wildcat's example, we realize that we're our greatest asset, our greatest resource, our closest relative, especially in times of crisis and uncertainty. Now, I would like to bring it all together and talk about healing, because I think that's really important. As we took and continue to take care of each other, we forgot to preserve the greatest resource, our greatest relative, which is ourselves. For many of us, our human spirit or the heart was neglected. Some of us gained a couple of pounds, me included, all right? Some of us developed physical ailments, and the stress had adverse effects on how we engage and socialize. Due to the combination of the stress due to COVID-19 and various social and cultural movements, some of us isolated from the madness of the world and went inwards. I can say that we're still processing what happened and what is still happening. So I'd like to leave you with this. I think I'm getting a high sign over here. We have to relearn the importance of healing and self-restoration. I want to be clear that I'm not saying to stop helping and being there for your fellow human beings, your relatives. We have to see the humanity within ourselves, recognize the imperfections, and work hard towards smoothing off those rough edges. Knowing that striving for perfection is a journey, or striving for excellence is a journey, a process that helps us to make us better. Our Earth has faced immeasurable trauma, as you can see from the videos that a student showed, and there was a wound that is causing great pain. As human beings, we have historically and recently experienced cultural and social trauma that is causing a wound in our hearts and disrupting the stability within our homes. Is it a mystery that the planet and our human condition are mirroring the same symptoms? Just like any wound is not treated properly, it can affect the body and cause adverse effects. So how do we begin to heal? We must seek out experts that are able to diagnose and treat the area where the trauma hit. As it pertains to the heart, we need special cardiologists to address the physical and the spiritual wounds. Seeking a therapist, a spiritual healer, a spiritual leader in conjunction with a medical doctor may be something to invest in. We must also take time to pause and reflect. Learning how to breathe properly affects many major organs of the body. How often do we sit to breathe and meditate? Just think about that for a second. When is the last time you showed your appreciation to your fellow human being? Let someone know how much they meant to you. I just met somebody from Jersey today. That was great just to know that, there's another Jersey person in the house. That was great. I'm giving you some love right now, all right? Sending a text, a letter, an email, a DM with an emoji, let someone know that they are being thought about, or giving someone a shout out while I'm talking. We must also develop meaningful relationships with our youth. In the same way that Mr. Wildcat's uncle may have invested time into him. As we are teaching our youth, it is also important that we take the time to appreciate what they have to teach us. I was truly amazed by the messages that they shared and emphasized throughout their art. My people, my friends, my relatives, my cousins, my brothers and sisters, within a place that we consider home, we must revisit how we respect our greatest resources and re-envision them as relatives. See that our hearts and human spirits are not disconnected from the place we call home. They are symbiotic. For healing to take place, we must take the time to pause, reflect, breathe, and seek out those whose purpose in life is to treat and heal. Let's make sure we do this together and not in isolation. I thank you for your time and have a good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. That was a great way to introduce the rest of the program this evening as we talk about the many different definitions of home. And with that, our next speaker is an artist and the founder and CEO of Flock Studio Incorporated, which is a community design and strategy studio. Sloan Leo, prior to founding Flock Studio, spent 15 years leading nonprofit staff and volunteer teams at the Environmental Defense Fund, the Trust for Public Land, and other organizations at the intersection of community, justice, and design. Please welcome Sloan Leo.
So thinking about home is actually thinking about where do we return? When things are hard, when the world is dark, when our options feel limited, what do we go back to? I go back to people every single time. When I've been sad, stressed, lonely, afraid, happy, thrilled, elated, I go back to people. Because to me, home is about community. It's not about a physical place. It's about a spirit of convening, of gathering, and of having room to ask a very important question, which is how will we move forward together? I've been working in community design for the last 20 years, and people always ask me one question, which is, Sloan Leo, what's community? And they always ask me like they're gonna trick me, like they're gonna be like, I gotcha. Do you know the answer? And I think it's an interesting question because it's a bit of a trick. It's true. Community is actually not a what, it's not a noun. Community isn't just a place or a thing. Community is actually something greater than that. It's a how. When I think about community, I think about all of the ways that we express community, and they're all actions. Community is about gathering and sharing and caring together. It's about showing up together. It's about connecting and dreaming and doing that all in the spirit of how might we do better by each other together. And why now? Why today? Why this day in November in the year 2021 do we really need each other? It's obvious to all of us because there's so few of us in the room. The moment that we are in, the crises that Dr. Watson alluded to, the pandemic, the way that it's forced us to be socially distant, the navigation of issues ranging from white supremacy to ecological disasters, to economic inequity, to deep social injustice. We're not at a time of thriving. But I have sat with that question for a while, and maybe there is a way out. At least I hope there is. From what I can tell as a community designer, working with organizations from the New York Women's Foundation to the Environmental Defense Fund to the Movement Voter Project, the way out is with all of us. We got here through a lot of pursuit of individual desires and greed and the possibilities of personal success for our families or those we hold most close. But what I have found to be true is that design is a pathway into working better together. And I come to design without a design degree. So yes, I am here on an SVA stage. I did not go to SVA, but I do teach there. And I found my way to design through theory. For those of you who don't know who Bell Hooks is, she's a Black feminist theorist who wrote this essay, Theory as Liberatory Practice. And in her essay, Bell Hooks asserts that theory, the idea of creating imaginative possibilities, is actually the most liberatory practice that we can have. And not to say that I'm Bell Hooks, because by far I am simply Sloan Leo, but when I reframe her statement, and I say, I came to design because I was hurting. I was isolated living in an all-white neighborhood as a queer, fat, disabled person who was trans. And I came because I needed to find out if the world was really not designed for me, and if so, what could I do about it? I wanted design to be a balm, to be a source of healing, and for art and creativity to be a way out and a way in to healing and to working together to create solutions. And whether it was the fact that I was queer or younger or brown or fat or just different, what I found is that design and community design in particular gave me a way in. And it made space to ask the question of, what does all of this matter? What does it matter how old I am or how different I am or how I think about the world? What it actually, I realized, came down to is that there was this fear. The fear that keeps us apart is a fear of shared power. So whether we're looking at the videos from today's students or thinking about the pandemic, the reality is because we can't get there alone, we have to face the need, and the need is for shared power. I don't want to be alone in this world. I don't want to be creating on my own. I want to be working better together so that we don't have images like this. This could be any small town in America, or in some cases even places like New York City, where we design one at a time, a park, a bottle of water, an experience, a school curriculum, and it doesn't get used. Whether we're designing a park or putting a highway over a sidewalk or creating a pair of shoes or a jewel that no one actually needs to be better, or places where there's places to walk but no sidewalks to walk on, how do we move from design that is built one at a time for one single source solution, or one at a time to some sort of very complicated system for engaging in the healthcare universe? The way out is by thinking about, what does it mean to not fit in the society that's been designed for us? What if the ways that we designed were actually done as a community? And we created systems so that we can have shared experiences and find joy together in parks that were designed like this one by the Trust for Public Land, with the youth here jumping in the air because they've built this park, they designed this mural. Or the folks here in the pandemic finding ways to enjoy the outdoor spaces together. These are collective interventions. And whether we're talking about a space to sit and to relax, or a place to plan, or creating resources that make our lives easier for one another, we are caring for each other through design. We are sharing our ideas and building prototypes that can have interventions at small scales, medium scales, and big scales. And to get to that level of connection, I want to just ground us for a quick moment in the fact that community design is a framework designed by people for people in the 1960s in Harlem. Black urban space planners and landscape architects came together to say, developers, we don't need you to just come in and bulldoze this and make us something. We actually just want the resources to build what we know that we need. Because community design, design done by community for community, is actually about relocating power and decision making away from the individual, moving swiftly from one to many, from centralized to decentralized, ultimately moving from a place where there is moving from I to all of us. So for those of you who are watching at home, and for those of you in the theater thinking about your practice as artists and designers, thinking about the craft, the strategy, and the values that inform your practice, there is an opportunity here to think about how we work together to share power as specifically as designers. And as designers, the only question that we really see facing us at Flock Studio is how do we actually design together? When you walked in today, you saw a set of practice posters. And those practice posters are from the lens of, as designers, let's not remove ourselves from community. Let's design with each other as friends, as facilitators, as teachers, as peers, as comrades, as colleagues, as neighbors, and as friends. So what can you do? Tonight, everyone's going to tell you great things about how to be involved with climate change and how to deal with economic justice and address poverty. And as designers, the name of the game is that we have to shift our practices. We have to move from solo practices to ones that champion the behaviors that are going to allow us in our craft, our values, and our strategies. So I'm going to give you just 10 ways that you can shift your practice. So if you're watching from home, you only have to remember one. So number one is embracing slowness and working at the pace of humanity, which is not actually as fast as our phones. To orient towards joy when things are hard, and to hold space for that gives us light and brightness. And to, of course, resist the binaries, because they are actually not our friend. They create false dichotomies of choices that don't have to be so hard. Find more room for both and not so much for either or. Communicate with bravery. Confront the conversations that feel hard, because within there is a truth and new potentials that you don't have to be afraid of. Find your way towards gratitude. Show care. Things that seem so obvious that we aren't doing in our day-to-day interactions as designers and as people. Don't be afraid to sit with the silence. It's not going to hurt you. Reach for nuance. Find those threads that tie your stories together as a designer working with community. There's a story in all of these lessons, in all of our interactions. Find that narrative and then dream beyond it. Don't stop at what we think is the future. Open the door just a little wider and see where you may be able to extend the story. And in all of this, hold space for rest. Hold space for being together. Because I really do think that for those of you who are in design school right now, there's something even better than you can imagine. And the only way that we're going to find our way there is through all of you working better with all of us. I believe in each of you, and we look forward to working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Sloan. Thank you so much. Some great ideas to ponder and really practice, I have to say. I love the rest part. we all need more sleep. The next two artists, they're two coming together, have worked together for years, and they are truly artists and activists. They've used their art to become activists. Andrew Castrucci is a New Yorker who integrates the beat and rhythm of New York City into his work. In 1986, he co-founded Bullet Space, an urban artist collaborative, including a print shop. Andrew co-published Your House is Mine, a book and poster project named one of the most important artists' book editions of the 20th century. And Nadia Cohen is a multidisciplinary artist creating project-based installations, books, printed matter, and ephemera. Within her practice, The Inclining Experiment, Cohen spearheaded several significant projects under collectives Anti-Utopia and Bullet Space, and she co-curated and conceptualized a limited edition book as well. Please welcome Andrew and Nadia Cohen to the stage.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to talk about Your House is Mine and Fractured Lives. And I just want to preface, I met Andrew in the mid-'80s. He had a gallery in the East Village, an underground, interesting gallery, and we started collaborating, doing very grassroots posters together. This was pre-computer times. Just paste up mechanicals, and it was a way for us to start putting art visuals together, and that was like the genesis of our collaboration. We're going to talk about two projects here, Fractured Lives, but we're going to start off with Your House is Mine, which is in the background over here. Your House is Mine, I'll just describe it. Basically, it's a book and street project. It's a limited edition book project that we created in response to housing and homelessness stemming from a lot of issues that were happening in the Lower East Side in the 80s. And it's a large-scale book. It's an edition of 150. There are many participants who are involved in it, a lot of artists and writers and activists. It's bound in lead. It's this big threatening object. And we created 150 of them, and we also created 150 of each poster that's in the book as a street project, which we plastered around the streets of New York City. Why did we do it? There was a lot of issues happening in the Lower East Side, a lot of, do you want to talk about this? The housing and homelessness epidemic. Go ahead.
The AIDS and crack epidemic was happening.
Yeah, there was hyper-gentrification, and basically there was a lot of upheaval, and especially in our neighborhood on the Lower East Side. And it all sort of culminated in this large riot, the Tompkins Square riots, where there were a lot of homeless people living in the park. There were a lot of curfews, but everything was really based around all this like need or lack of housing.
And this was coming out of the Reagan-Bush era. So we remember George Bush's famous line, the New World Order. So it was a time where they were having curfews in parks and trying to control people's social habits of how to meet. You had to have certain permits if you had 6 people or more. And Tompkins Square Park, in order to gentrify a neighborhood, you have to have a curfew and a clean park. So Tompkins Square Park became very symbolic.
Right. So, you know, just kind of in the spirit of like Andrew and I, we were like, okay, what do we do? What can we do in response to all of this rioting? And so we were like, let's make a poster. And then we realized, okay, that poster is not enough. And so we started to create this collaborative project. We invited many, many individuals to participate in this, and it grew and became this this really dimensional project that culminated in a lot of the posters that you see up here on the screen. Do you want to talk about Bullet Space? So basically, Andrew was part of Bullet Space. I'll let him speak about that.
So the theme of the book dealt with housing. There was a lot of pressure when someone is paying over 50, 60% of their income to rent. But there was also a squatting movement going on. Where the Lower East Side was sort of like the South Bronx, it was half the neighborhood was abandoned buildings. So people started taking over the buildings, and why let the developers have them? And our block was, we named our squad Bullet Space. It was sort of the heroin capital of the world at that time, the Lower East Side. So all night you would hear Bullet, 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 just selling that brand name. So we appropriated that name Bullet, not to romanticize the drug culture, but use it as art as a weapon or art for social change. And that's what this project had a lot to do with. And it helped us get legalized. We put these on the front of our building. It was sort of like it protected us, sort of an omen of protection. The city was trying to evict us at one point, and at the same time, the public library was buying one of our books. So it was an interesting stage of what was going on, and we were always interested in penetrating as squatters. So we were interested in penetrating the museums. So it was interesting how our books showed up at the Guggenheim or the Whitney and different museums acquiring the book, besides being street posters. I always treat art as a very democratic process, each process of collecting the materials and then building it and printing it, but actually to distribute it was kind of fun. That sort of Kafkaesque feeling when your book slips into a museum.
So I want to talk about, even though Andrew's talking about bullet space and the squatter movement, it was also like a broader, it touched more broadly of all people having a difficult time with housing and what influences lack of housing and the whole environment, as we talked about, there was a crack epidemic, there was a lot of different things going on. So what we wanted to do was really have all these artists who reflected all these different aspects of a community. And so there were some, many different artists. There were stencil artists, like individuals like John Fechner and Anton Van Dalen. There were graffiti artists who participate in it. I think there's some showed in this
Lady
Pink and Lee Quinones
and Stash. So that idea of high and low art was really important to us. Children's art.
Right, and like
comics. Well, when you see that David Wojnarowicz poster in the left-hand corner, just dealing with comics as an art form, and Tom McGlynn working with pop culture icons, the Die Hard Battery.
And then we also, we invited, there were the Nuyorican pioneer poets like Bimbo Rivas and Miguel Pinheiro, and many other writers who participated in a whole editorial section of this book, as well as local poets, Will Sales, and children who participated in all these posters. So
when we sort of art direct these book projects, or when I work with my students, I'm interested in the more abstract, like the fishhook. Can we go back one? And not just these direct, literal interpretations. So, for instance, the fishhook, these abstract elements, were kind of part of these book projects. So sometimes they're more direct, and other times they're more abstract, just dealing with addictions. So that was kind of important for us. So I always tell my students to let art come first. Let the social message be on the 3rd layer or the 10th layer. Don't always make it so easy to make it more cryptic.
So as we spoke about, the book took a really long time to make. It took 4-5 years to make. And it started off where we set up a print shop, and every silkscreen was printed by hand. And then it grew. It grew into this book, and then it was shown in certain institutions. This is the Guggenheim Lab downtown on the Lower East Side.
So it documents all the street posters from that 5-year period.
But then at the same time, we printed all these lightweight posters, and we plastered them around the city as urban intervention, so that it could reach people, every person. It could confront all these ideas of spaces being closed up, and so that's how this project was it was this dual project. It was also used as some of these posters were used in protest marches. Here they are at Tompkins Square Park, and so we use them, we used it all. Do you want to talk about this?
No,
This
keep
page?
going.
No, I'm just saying, like, so we kind of used it in multi different ways.
And that's the front of our building, how it sort of protected us from evictions. Someone called the posters, they look like a quilt, because the Lower East Side was filled with so many abandoned buildings, so many silkscreen's very rich ink and colorful, and the ink pops off the page. So someone called it like a quilt. And I love that poster on the left, that grouping there, because it replaced the window. And it was almost like a gorilla quilt, being decorative but yet hard. So it had a positive aspect. We got a little defensive when someone called our book the Tombstone of New York City, because New York went through a very dark period with the AIDS and crack epidemic and homelessness, but we always defended it. We're living. It's about life, and we're getting these buildings legalized. There were 500 squatters around the Tompkins Square Park riots, and we eventually negotiate with the city where we legalized 11 of the buildings. So this book helped us get these buildings legalized, that we were making contributions to the neighborhood.
Right. We're going to flip to this last slide over here for Your House is Mine. We also printed the book pages or the editorial page into a newspaper. We created 10,000 copies of this so that it was more accessible. And
people were reading them on the subways. That was fun to see.
So that's Your House is Mine. I'm going to show you Fractured Lives. So Andrew's going to talk about this mostly. You want to go for it?
So Fractured Lives, instead of coming out of a squat or the Lower East Side using a fire hydrant to clean the screens, this book comes out of School of Visual Arts. I teach at SVA, so I started a project with my students, just making posters about fracking. And not too many people even knew what the word meant in 2010. But what was happening in New York State, it was a gold mine. It was like the oil rush in Texas. So we took on this topic, and it turned into a book project. And it was about 50% of SVA students, and then I merged it with other artists from our first book and other professional artists we've been working with over the years. And fracking is about, they drill for natural gas, but the frack industry tells you it's a clean energy, it's less carbon than coal, it's a transition fuel, but it was a lot of misinformation, because it turned out it was poisoning our aquifers, it was poisoning our water sources. I eventually moved upstate, so that's why fracking became kind of personal. It was sort of ground zero for fracking. I live in the poorest region of New York State, the Southern Tier. And this book had a lot to do with environmental racism, or I should say maybe environmental classism, when you dump on the poorest region. And the Southern Tier is the poorest region of New York State, and that's where they targeted fracking. And that's where they dumped their sludge. When Pennsylvania was going full force for fracking, all the sludge crossed the Susquehanna River and was dumped in New York State.
So this is a collection of the posters that you see over here. These were these are what are in the book, and you'll see later on in some other slides how they were used in certain marches. This is the book cover. So it's basically like the sister to Your House is Mine, right? It's Your House is Mine was lead, was bound in lead, and the lead was like sealed so people could, wouldn't freak out holding it. This is, what is this material?
This is sheet metal, and silk screening. I started to form a print shop. First, I had the print shop in the first book at Bullet Space. Then I started printing at School of Visual Arts. Then during COVID, we set up another print shop upstate. And this is where we're doing the covers here.
So here you see all the posters being used. Do you want to talk about this? These marches.
Yeah, so there were 3 major marches. We used the posters as banners. One was in Albany to get Como to ban fracking. The other one was when Obama was speaking in Binghamton. He was a pro-fracker. And then the climate march in New York City. What was interesting about the 2 books, after we finished them, I was like, wow, this really worked. It created social change. Whereas the Your House is Mine book got us legal as homesteaders. And the fracking book, we forced Governor Como to ban fracking because he came so close to giving the go-ahead for fracking. And we became an interesting movement. And I remember Robert Kennedy Jr. said, I haven't seen this since the 60s. Yoko Ono was very involved. It was a big contingent. And the Albany demonstration was the biggest one. And we sort of forced the governor to rethink it or to listen to the alternative information. That's what's important about what we do is alternative information compared to the oil and gas industry. We kind of live in an age of lies. The frack industry, lied to us that it's going to be, your water's going to be safe, but meanwhile our aquifers were being polluted. Big Pharma lies to us about the opiate addiction. ExxonMobil lied to us for 30 years about global warming. So this age of lies, so us as artists to counter that, that's why I think these posters were important, to give an alternative to what the misinformation we were getting, and then we forced the governor to change the tide of fracking. So, and we eventually got a ban of fracking in New York State.
Yeah, this last slide, again, it's a newspaper version of the book, and I believe it's all in your little pouches there.
One last thing I want to say, what was so absurd about fracking is the Bush-Cheney administration excused we passed the Clean Air and Water Act 1972 and 74. So the frack industry was excused. Halliburton was free not to go by those guide rules, which was absurd. And it was just an example of how powerful the oil and gas industry, how they own our politicians and control them. So we felt, art worked in the sense that we forced the governor to ban fracking. And we also, one of the posters was called Protect Your Mother by Alexandra Rojas, which she's part Native American, and protect your mother, protect Mother Nature. She's kind of like a water protector. She has her hunting rifle in front of the Unadilla River. Other subjects we were researching were rights of nature, which is actually a successful law that happened in Ecuador and Bolivia. It was their Clean Water Act to fight the oil and gas industry. It's actual law, the rights of nature. And we were also inspired by that with this project. Pennsylvania was trying to come up with the rights of nature. So it was a new language compared to our Clean Air and Water Act.
So, should we put the last slide on, I think? Do you want to talk about this, or should you good with this? This newspaper? You'll get to experience the newspaper in your goodie bags.
Well, the first book we did, was before the digital age, so it was all paste up. Which was interesting. Nadia comes from a paste-up artist, where So that newspaper was all hand done. Even all the lines was done with black tape. She was a master at making charts, where this one was more digitalized and we did it in color versus the old black and white.
You know, we've just used art as an act of resistance, and that's been the impetus with a lot of the history of these projects, and we really believe art as a vehicle of resistance is extremely powerful.
Sometimes it works.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Nadia and Andrew, for being the activists that you are. So we've talked about heart in the home in the heart. We've talked about community and home. We've talked about the actual living space, and we've talked about how the earth can be damaged by people. Finally, our next speaker talks about the earth as a whole, how one circumstance far, far away can really affect the rest of the planet. And I do remind you to please put any questions you have on those little cards in your bag or on the Facebook feed. We'd love to hear from you because we'll be having a panel in just a moment. So we talk about the Amazon, and I'm not talking about the online retailer. We're talking about the Amazon jungle far away. Mariana Olinger is a Brazilian interdisciplinary artist, researcher, and human rights activist, and her practice spans art, writing, design, performance, often in collaboration with other artists, social movements, and community organizations. She's worked closely with over 24 organizations, governments, and international agencies on human and humanitarian rights. Performance artist, recently did something wonderful in Central Park. Mariana Olinger, come on up. We want to hear all about your performance art, the Amazon, and what we can do.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. I will start my presentation by giving a little context before I actually talk about the project I did.
The 85% spike in forest fires.
This year, fires raged across the Amazon basin, causing massive destruction and threatening the ecosystem that is most vital to our Earth's climate. Devastation to indigenous lands was unprecedented. More than 8 million hectares of the Amazon were lost to flames.
Oops. Hi, everyone. This is a vision of part of the Earth on the northern summer of 2019. What you see in red here are fires. Unfortunately, in the past 2 years, the situation didn't get better. It got a little worse. Although part of these fires are called natural fires or forest fires, a lot of those are man-made fires. This recently, in July 2021, the IPCC, which is the International Panel on Climate Change, released its most recent report, which is signed by 195 scientists. And it's very worrying, you know. I have been a humanitarian rights activist for 20 years now, and I thought I knew, like what was going wrong in the world. Until I started working with a collective of environmental journalists from Brazil a few months ago. And what I found was really scary, to say the least. This is a project who maps fires in the Amazon. So every one of these dots is a fire in the Amazon on the summer of 2020. Why is this happening, right? So actually, sorry, 1 second. This wasn't supposed to be this one. Yeah? No, sorry. Well, why does it happen? The Amazon forest, it's not prone to fires, as I said before. Those fires are man-made, are mostly criminal fires, and they are made to open the forest for extractive operations. What you see here is a part of the forest who has been just opened for mining. What you see in red is mercury. Another driving force of, yeah, for some reason part of this is not working. I had a different slide in which showed also the impacts of the cleaning of the forests for soy plantations or cattle farming. And Brazil is one of the biggest soy producers and one of the biggest cattle producers in the world, which means basically we are destroying the forest to put that technically to feed people elsewhere, but this is not exactly working. And what we're doing is damaging the lives of many thousands of peoples. In the Amazon alone is home of over 1.5 million indigenous peoples spread over into 9 different countries. And one of the things that I found out while I was doing this work is that although we're talking about net zero and how can we curb our emissions in developed countries as a way to defeat climate change or to slow climate change, what some of those things are doing is to put pressure in local populations. So you have corporations, for instance, taking advantage of this idea of net zero and buying protected land to offset their emissions. So the idea is like, oh, so we can buy this land here and we can keep that forest standing while we keep emitting gases into our atmosphere. And I also started to learn that indigenous peoples are some of the best protectors of forests and the biodiversity in the world. 80% of the world's biodiversity today is in indigenous lands occupied by indigenous peoples all over the world. A big portion of that in the Amazon, but not only in the Amazon. This is like, it's true for all over the world, including the United States in some cases. One of the things I found was another report published earlier this year, Indigenous Resistance Against Carbon, just showed how indigenous resistance to fossil fuel projects has compensated, has prevented emissions equivalent to the emissions of United States and Canada combined. Although the guardians of the lands are super threatened. 2020 was a record year for murders of environmental and indigenous defenders. So I thought, what can I do, right? And how can I integrate all these things that I'm finding out and that I'm perplexed with? How do I bring that into my artwork? How can I express, how can I share those messages with people in different ways? So I had this opportunity. I was awarded a New York City Art Discourse grant, which was an initiative to mitigate the impacts of the COVID pandemics in New York City among artists. And they asked you to propose a public activity, something that engaged public in some way. And so I had already been working with folks from Smoke Signal, which are the journalists monitoring the social environmental crisis in Brazil. And I wrote my proposal. This was like August, and I was like, what climate events are happening that I could do something, right? And September is a big month for climate action in New York City. You have You have the New York City Climate Week, which happens every September. It happens in conjunction with the UN General Assembly, so you have eyes from all over the world looking at New York. This year it didn't happen, but in many years we also have the Climate March, which brings together frontline defenders, NGOs, environmentalists from all over the world to march in New York City. I think you guys showed an intervention, a fracking intervention, in one of the climate marches. So it's like, okay, I want to do something for the Climate Week. What am I going to do? It's like, well, I'm going to occupy a very green space of the city, which is Central Park. And I want to bring a message, right? So I started to network and to talk to other organizations I knew people in. One of them is Amazon Watch, which supports like a plethora of different campaigns related to the climate crisis and the protection of threatened biomes and environments. And I also exchange ideas with APIB, which is the articulation of the indigenous peoples of Brazil. I don't know if you have any idea, but in Brazil, we still have over 300 different ethnicities, indigenous ethnicities living in Brazil, speaking over 100 different languages. And I was like, okay, so what can we, oops. So it's like, I spoke to them, and I came up with this project which had different components. One of them I'm going to show you was a performance that it was supposed to mark the opening, an alternative opening of the Climate Week in New York City. And we did a sort of a ceremony performance and in the ship's meadow at the park. And I also intervened in the park in different ways, which I'm going to show right after this little video of our performance. So this video was, the performance was done in Central Park on the morning of the opening of Climate Week NYC. The video was edited right away and was distributed through the organizations that I collaborated with in developing the messages. We got like thousands of views, and the idea was that that piece circulated in social media on that day to call attention on that particular space. Another part of the intervention was I had these signs made, I made these signs with more like comprehensive messages related to these issues that I was touching on, and with QR codes that people could actually, that could direct people to the different initiatives I wanted to call attention for, and it spread them in different parts of the park. So people could actually connect to the messages closer, but more than that, that could connect people to the actual campaigns, initiatives that are out there. There is a number of initiatives happening everywhere for decades now. But you know, it's also very common to hear people saying, I don't know what to do. I'm concerned, this is a problem, but I don't know where to start, right? And so I thought, okay, I can give you some cues, right? Some ways in which you can, some organizations or campaigns you can support. So, and then I'm going to talk about them here a little bit. So one of them is the initiative called Amazonia 80 by 25, which is this pledge to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025, which to me doesn't really sound very much. I'd really like a moratorium and protect 100% of the thing at this point after we destroyed so much of it. But this is a pledge that is led by COICA, which is the Coordination of Indigenous Organizations of the Amazon Basin. So this involves indigenous organizations from 9 different countries in the Amazon. It's supported by a number of NGOs, and they have this really amazing website, which is called Amazon 80 by 25, in which you can engage in different ways. Not only you can learn, you can connect, you can sign pledges, and I adore this particular campaign, and I have like a tremendous respect for the indigenous peoples who are leading this kind of initiatives, because at one hand they are going to international forums and spending their lives trying to defend their territories, as their people are being actually threatened and sometimes killed on a regular basis. Another campaign I directed people from in those signs is the Stop the Money Pipeline campaign, which I think is something that is very closer to most of us. If you have a bank account at Bank of America, Chase, JP Morgan, all these institutions, unfortunately, are still funding climate destruction through their portfolios of projects they are actually still supporting. So a number of organizations, there's dozens of organizations involved in these particular campaigns, and they give you a number of ways in which you can engage, from simple things like writing emails to your bank managers, to actually engage in direct action, demonstrations, and other things. So I wanted to share these with you because these things sometimes seem small, but when we have a lot of people engaging, these things make a difference, right? If someone knows, like if they know their clients are not supporting what they're doing, and if this grows, we can have a chance to actually have policies changes in these institutions. And this is just a break to look at these beautiful birds, the araras. It's how they call them in Brazil. They are in the Amazon. They used to be all over the country, but now not so much. And then to wrap up, this was how the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil front website was until a few days ago. They change it constantly, depending on the campaign they are leading. These people really need support. If you can support in different ways, you can reach out to them. They have their materials in English. They have people who are available to talk with audiences all over the world, to organize, you can really make a difference and help in different ways, from chipping some bucks if you can, to actually engaging in different ways in campaigns. This is their current campaign for the COP26, which is the World Environmental Conference, which is happening right now in Glasgow. And this is another organization that I connected people to through the signs, which is the ANMIGA. They are an organization of ancestral women from Brazil. They bring together both indigenous and African Brazilian women, traditions women's. And this whole idea of, the idea of their work in particular is try and reconnect ourselves with the land. Right, something that Dr. Jarvis brought here also in his inspiring speech. And like what makes us what we are, how we connected to the land. So they're there, they exist. You can also connect with them. You can also support them in different ways. There's a number of them right now in Glasgow, making their pledges and trying to defend their lands and their livelihoods, because You know, these people, it's not by chance that most of the standing forest is in the hands of these people. And the reason is that these people depend on the forest for their livelihoods, right? And they know how to keep it standing. So before the last slide, I just put this one so I make sure I don't forget thanking anyone. So first, thank you everyone at SVA and Continuing Education for inviting me for this. Karen, Joe, Valerie, Nika, Stephanie, thank you so much. This is a beautiful event. I've attended other events like this in the past, so congratulations, this is amazing. Obviously, thank you to all the artists and the people who helped me make these projects. I have a number of artists who performed, came together, helped me in different ways. All the organizations who have been doing the work on the front lines. And finally, there's something else that I would like to, I had already planned to do this, but it's, I found it really serendipitous that Dr. Jarvis also brought this in his speech. I wanted to thank something that normally we don't really take time to thank, and I'd like to thank the waters. That especially, this is something I've learned from Indigenous peoples, this idea of connecting to the different elements of the earth as relatives and not only as something that you use and dispose as you wish. So I'd really like to take this moment to thank the waters, because I don't know what would be of any of us without it. And then I will finish with a 1-minute meditation for us.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you so much. We're going to take just a few minutes to have our speakers come back up on stage. So Dr. Watson, Nadia Cohen, Andrew Castrucci, Sloan Leo, Mariana Olinger, please. So, everybody has a microphone? Microphone. I think everybody's here. Okay. I know. Okay, are we on our chairs? Okay. We're good. Anybody have any questions, please? Oh, there are questions. Nika, I'm going to ask a very quick question first while we take these together. Dr. Jarvis Watson, because you are new here at SVA and this is your new home.
Yes.
And you speak so eloquently about the heart and home. I want to ask you, how have you changed in the past year during the pandemic? What does home mean to you beyond, you know, your new wife and watching TV at home and Luther Vandross songs? What does home mean to you now that SVA is your new home and you have this new wonderful position here?
Wow. The fact that I live about 2 hours away Home is always something I hold dear in my heart. And I think trying to find different ways of defining home in ways that I haven't done before. I'll start with the aspect of being in COVID. It paused me, or actually caused me to pause and kind of do more reflection of where I wanted to go and where I wanted to be. And actually tapped into some of my visual arts skill set in learning how to be an editor and how to edit film and how to develop podcasts, but most importantly, how do I get the message out for those who are voiceless, who didn't have a voice. And we actually worked with, speaking of my wife, we actually worked together to develop, and she'll make sure I give her props so she's watching, gave me the idea to develop some type of community conversation, voices of the community, that really tapped into what people were thinking, what people were feeling, what people were experiencing, and putting that out on Zoom so everyone can know that, one, I'm not the only one going through this, and two, I know I can lean on some other folks. And really partnering with a lot of community organizations. I'm doing at Soberly, State of Black Long Island, which is a part of the Urban League. Shout out to them. But as it pertains to being here, learning how to be uncomfortable in a new environment, and to kind of step out on faith a little bit, to kind of say, I've been in the state system for, I don't know, maybe 15-something years, and to come out of that particular institutionalized kind of experience and be in a place where free thought, free expression, creativity was something that people really circled around and really invested time and energy into. Diversity, free expression, I think those are things that came together, and I think a lot more of me is coming out in that particular way. So I'm just kind of figuring out what is my visual arts language now that I'm trying to create here, and it's been a wonderful experience since December of 2020. Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. So thank you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. All of you on this stage have used your art and your creativity to create new ideas and to create change, because we need it. So before I get to these questions, I have questions, and I'm an interviewer, so forgive me, but I want to know, for those of us who may not have your skills as artists, although I believe everybody's an artist on some level, how can we be a part of the change in our homes, in our communities, in the earth? How can we use our own power inside of us? And these are very quick answers, by the way. I'm going to go down the line. Start with you, Sloan. You were so eloquent with your presentation. Inform us how we can be part of this.
I think making a quick assumption that you're not, you're already part of the change. It's more about realizing your own power rather than assuming that you just don't have it and you're not part of things. You're probably part of a neighborhood. You can join a community board, you can volunteer someplace, you can support a community fridge or give out a meal. There's already something waiting for you right where you are.
Andrew.
I feel small victories are big victories. So just by making a poster, it's a big victory. Or sometimes I see these little black and white Xerox posters on lampposts, and they're so powerful, just as powerful as a billboard in Times Square. So those little things are special.
I think for me, the impetus is to really be able to inquire and to look within, and to know that we all have an ability to ask questions and to connect, and to be unafraid of that, and to lean into relationships as forms of communication. So I'm not even talking about art making. I'm just talking, or whatever that medium is, I'm talking about actual communication, and how do we really foster inner communication with ourselves, which is also becomes communication with our loved ones or people that we meet, and create and foster communication.
Yeah, I would say find that voice, find that inner voice, and then find some type of medium and to help amplify that voice. And like I said, it might be writing for me, it might be painting for others, it might be like doing video editing or design and things like that. But I think we all have something within us that is speaking all the time, but we're just trying to figure out how to get it out. I think going back to COVID, it forced me to pause, and I think it's forcing a lot of us to pause to really figure out what it is that we're trying to get out, and what medium is going to be best for us to get it out. You know, and I think that's something for me. I think writing, as well as doing the podcast or some type of visual representation, was for me to help get that message out, trying to find ways of amplifying it on a bigger scale. So.
Yeah, I think I think the first thing that came to my mind is this, I think Dr. Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, she always says, like, you know, activism is anything. You know, you can be an activist anywhere and everywhere. But I think it's really important to find and to create spaces for empathy, not to be repetitive, because I agree with everyone said so far. I think we are in a particularly difficult moment in our planet right now. And sometimes it's very difficult to find empathy, you know, to try and open our hearts and our minds to what is around us and to the other, right? To be able to go beyond our own difficulties and sorrows, which are many for many of us right now. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I have a number of questions here. I'm just going to start. This is for you, Andrew and Nadia. To what extent were your books for the general public versus the people who were affected? Example, the homeless.
It was important we made an artifact that represented our neighborhood was changing. It was one of the last melting pots. So we wanted to make a record that got preserved. But the book had many dimensions. We printed 10,000 newspapers, so that was for the people. There were a couple of homeless guys that would sell the papers and made a living off of it with 10,000 papers. The money we generate from selling books, we do other exhibitions and newspapers, and it just continues. So there were many levels. I believe in high and low art. I believe in the museums, and I also believe in the streets. So it's important we participate on those many stages.
Yeah, I can chime in here. Also, you know, doing the book in all these different formats, right? So the street posters, that was just plastered on the street. That was for people. That was for everybody who would just like encounter them. Also, we had the book at the that bank on Avenue C. What was that? The People's Bank.
The credit union.
Yeah, the credit union. I thought that was really beautiful. It's like we had this like book just being, you know, anybody could actually just like take a look at that at a local credit union bank. I thought that was really interesting when we did that. So yeah, I think there was a big variation of people that we reached, and that's really what it was all about. It was just this very big mixed voice of individuals.
Andrew, I like what you said. I like the museums. I also like the streets. That's a great quote. Somebody write that down. Could you? Thank you. Sloan, what advice do you have for starting conversations with the community? And how do you find opportunities and needs in a community if, for example, you don't belong to the community?
We get this question a lot. I've been teaching at the School of Visual Arts Design for Social Innovation program, and students will come up and say, oh, well, I really want to help. I want to help the disabled. I want to help the poor. I want to help. I want to help. I want to help. And want them to help very much. Help is needed. And the best way in is honestly to think about where can you be of service in a way that is not paternalistic. So I think that it's not just about helping, it's about looking in your own neighborhood and saying what's unfinished and what's stuck. So rather than saying like, oh, the poor and those in need, think about it more as like, what do I need? Like, what is the community that I'm a part of struggling with? And there's something There's a Not in My Backyard campaign around a power plant that you can get involved in. Like, there's something where you live in the relationships you already have, so that you're not just kind of trying to parachute in and like introduce some sort of savior complex. We don't need more saviors. We need more like repairers and maintainers where they are.
Thank you. I don't know who this question is for, but I'll throw it out to the group. As someone who grew up with the internet as their home and who now does digital design, how do we design healthy online communities and virtual homes? Who would like to take that? I think that's you, Sloan.
It might be me. I'm younger than I look. I'm older than I look. But what I was going to say is that there's something interesting about ethics in digital community that is like a very new space. So there's this idea of like artificial intelligence ethics and how do you avoid algorithmic bias. But there's even simple ethics around like when you're facilitating a Zoom meeting, who chooses who speaks? Because it's not like we're just in a room together. There's a decision making, there's power, there's gatekeeping that's held there. So in constructing digital communities, how do you preserve the room for like organic self-determination and agency in digital spaces where things can be disrupted, where the code is not so tight and the structures are not so tight that people can't have happy accidents and hard accidents. So I think for anyone who's working in digital kind of ecosystems right now, the question becomes like, how do you protect the ability of like revolt or revolution in digital spaces that are so heavily curated and structured?
It's such an important topic because it's you know, we were all thrown into this blender of Zoom that it became a whole new story. And such
It's a metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. So very, very important. Thank you, Sloan. For Andrew, can you speak a little more about the home of artists you created when squatting Bullet Space?
Can you repeat that?
Can you speak about the home of artists you created when squatting? What happened there?
It was a neighborhood that had 50% was abandoned buildings. So is Donald Trump's kids going to get them and the developers, or are the people in the neighborhood going to get them? So that was the struggle. It sort of peaks around the Tompkins Square Park riots when there's 500 squatters, homesteaders. And the people at Bullet Space, we framed it more around artists. It was an art space. That was our common ground. And what is an artist? Poets are artists, carpenters are artists. So that was a big word. But I tried to fight that it was that was our common ground in the building, that we needed a print shop. We stole a building. We got it for $1, even though we borrowed $1 million from the banks to renovate it. But we felt like we had to give something back. That's why we had the community space, the exhibition space. So that was one way of giving back.
And these people, the artists, actually moved in and lived and thrived in these spaces.
Yes, so it was a work and a live space. And you had to, in the beginning, you paid $50 a month, and you had to do work days. And the rents eventually go up to $300. It was all self-help, self-determination. We put up our own sheetrock. So when we made the deal with the city, that was kind of difficult. Because when we got legalized, they sort of put a gun to our heads. You got to play ball or else we're going to evict you. But in order to get legalized, 50% of our costs go to soft costs. Banks, lawyers, construction managers that just go around taking photographs, and building inspectors. So the $1 million to renovate it, half of it, we could have did it for half that money. And it's post 9/11 too, so construction costs go crazy. So there was an element of self-help, self-determination. But it got frustrating when we cut the deal with the city because we needed licensed people to do things.
Did you, Nadia and Andrew, did you ever imagine that you would be that involved with housing and fracking and water and Governor Cuomo, all this stuff that you did?
Did you set out to do this in your life?
You're sort of forced to live. With Bullet Space, in order to remain there, you had to fight for it, or else there was that constant threat. We had 30 buildings, and 20 were evicted. And then we had 10 left in the end. So it was a necessity. When fracking was a necessity, they're in your backyard, and they're gonna frack. You're in the southern tier. It's gold underground. So it was a necessity if you want to remain there. So sometimes you don't have a choice. It's the necessities. I want to make art for the sake of art, and I miss that because I kind of political art. I sometimes I hate it. It's weak, and so I do still believe in art for art's sake, but you're forced into to exist, certain situations.
Another great quote. Somebody write that down. Another good one, Andrew. Full of great nuggets tonight. From Facebook, our question is, how can design thinking be brought into public education and more accessible? This is a big question. Sloan?
Hi, it's me again. The thing about design education, and I say this as a design educator, is that we think we should go out into every place and be like, design, it will save all of us. And like, it can, I guess, but I think it's more like it's a set of tools. So what I hope for in education in general are just more tool sets, including design, to help people navigate that which is painful, difficult, and overwhelming. So for me, design gave me language, it gave me frameworks, it gave me community, it gave me a way of relating to challenges that said, this is solvable, this is not impossible. So if any tool set that can help young people and people kind of like on the rise say, oh, there's this problem in my backyard, I can think through how to solve for this, I know what to do now. It gives you steps and solution frameworks. So in as much as design can help us with that, I think the way in is by giving people the set of like, here's a menu of tools. Design is one of them, facilitation is one, arts are one, math is another one. But they should all be in the vein of like making things better together and having shared language to do that.
Dr. Watts, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I was just thinking having more individuals like Sloan to come into some of these school systems and actually represent, the folks that they want to become or should become or can become. I think I've never met like a black architect. I never really met a black designer, so I'm just thinking if I would be exposed to someone at that particular age, how would my life be different in regards to me being able to visualize that I can be that particular person? And that's probably not just with, art design, but a lot of different things that we don't see within our historically marginalized communities. But I think in the same way that doctors and lawyers are being praised of saving lives or changing systems, how is it that design is doing that, and how to articulate that at a young age? I had a young kid who was about maybe 7 or 8 years old, running his own conservation organization, nonprofit organization to help save the earth. And I'm like, what made you want to do this? He was just like, because I just want to make sure when I'm older, have a place where I can still play ball and do all the things I'm doing now. I'm like, wow, that's pretty astute for someone your age. But someone was paying attention to that particular young person and was like, you can do this now. And part of the design concept was the fact that he created a website. Somebody had to help him take the idea to be like, okay, you have an idea in your head. Now let me put this into a virtual or visual kind of context so you can get your message out to other folks. Think of how many people he's affected. I meant to wear his pen tonight too. I forgot to wear that tonight. I'm sorry, wherever you are, young man. But just to show that the earlier that we kind of inject some of these or inoculate some of these ideas into the young folk to make it seem like you can be successful and you will be successful. Matter of fact, you have more agency on how your life is going to be based off the fact that you have these skill sets that come with being a designer. I think we can do that. And like I said, but most importantly, making sure we have representation in our communities.
Thanks, Travis.
So we're going to wrap this panel up and thank everybody tonight. But before we go, there is a question. It's specific to Andrew and Nadia, but actually I'm going to expand it a little bit with your permission, who asked the question about how did the anti-fracking movement get so big for you? But I'm going to ask everybody because it's about the art that you engaged in to create change and to create movement through your art. So Mariana, with you, the movement that you're doing now to get people to understand what is needed beyond what we hear, but what is truly needed in the Amazon, how did it get so big for you?
I think I've always been touched by injustice in different ways, and for me it is regardless of where I am, and what kind of injustice it is. And as I said, recently I started to work with a group of environmental journalists, and that opened my eyes in a different way to a specific kind of injustice that is going on. And I want to also refer to something that I think Sloan said in the beginning, that we need to exit as much as possible the binaries, right? And think more beyond the either ors. And so one thing that I want to actually make clear is when I was designing the message for the large banner, it was like the net zero won't protect the Amazon, or it's not like net zero is a bad idea at all. It's a good concept and it's a good framework for us to start to think, of things that we can do to change the environment we live in right now and prevent the further worsening of the climate change. But the way it's not like the ultimate solution, and actually this idea that it could be an ultimate solution is hurting people on the ground. And that for me was a big thing. Was so when I was thinking about, what can I do, what kind of message I'm gonna disseminate, and I was doing research on the New York City Climate Week program. And there was this net zero, and to be honest, a lot of what I saw, it just felt like greenwashing. We want to put here this beautiful message of this wonderful thing we're gonna do, while 2020, the record year for murders of environmental and indigenous defenders. So there's something wrong, right?
So it's important to look beyond the obvious in this case. Dr. Watson, diversity, equity, inclusion, huge terms today. You have this inaugural position. How did it get so big?
But as far as DEI or fracking?
No, not fracking. I'm not asking you about fracking.
Okay, I was about to go.
No,
okay.
You can say, what? I have no idea.
How did it become so big? I think just to kind of echo some of the things that Mariana was talking about, I don't like seeing people being treated less than human. And I think the world started seeing people being treated less than human, and not just last year, but I think the compounding of, I will start for me personally, from 1619 in this particular country, the compounding of this actually came to a particular point last summer, and where people were just we just had enough. And the things that people have been talking about for generations and generations and generations came to a particular point where I think we all had to say, even if I'm not black, even if I'm not a black male, I still see another human hurting. And that humanity is something that I think is starting to help people understand that, what, am I contributing to, maybe I didn't put my knee on someone's neck, but am I contributing something similar in the place that I am in my particular or respective industry that is hurting or killing or maiming not just that particular person, but generations after generations. Think about what George Floyd's daughter has to go through psychologically because her father was lost. And think of how many other lives have been lost based off of injustice, especially environmental injustice. The fact that those that we identify or that self-identify as indigenous are dying because they're protecting their land, protecting their culture, protecting their way of life. That is something evil that we have to make sure that we stand up against, because like I said, as I start to think about expanding my family and things like that, I want them growing up in places like that. And also thinking about what my mom and my father and their parents had to go through just to be identified as more than 3/5 of a person. I don't want to have to go through another generation of that. I would say enough is enough. You know, so I think that's why DEI is starting to be more prevalent and come a little bit more strength, because I think we don't ever want to go back to what that normal was. I think COVID in some aspects helped us out in a way of saying, like, this is a new normal. We definitely won't go back to that abnormal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep. So I'm done.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nadia and Andrew, how did anti-fracking get so big?
I'm going to speak from a personal point of view because I'm not that politically oriented, even though I have worked on a lot of these like social political projects. But I think that what I'm really interested in is the micro and the macro and the relationship between those two, the personal and the political, and that the personal is political and the political is personal. And I'm really interested in the fine line between those things of the literal and then what is not that literal. And from a personal point of view and from a personal stance, I believe that we all start from this like inner place and that we are connected into this world and this community and these issues, and we are by default or by choice connected to this and, you know, have a place to participate. But more literally, Andrew? Yeah.
Well, when you make a piece of artwork, sometimes the frame is 50%. And working with Nadia, the designer, is half of it. You could be a great painter, but if it's not framed correctly or if it's not displayed in a book properly, it weakens it. And to answer the question about fracking, New York has some of the best water in the country. We forget that when you think of New York City, the urban environment. But our reservoirs from upstate, it's all gravity pull. Yep. It's a very old, primitive. We're on a slope, but we're at even the Lower East Side, we're below sea level, so all the water's just naturally coming down. So when you have 19 million people and you're gonna poison their aquifers, that creates a lot of involvement. It helped having Yoko and Sean Lennon. They were my neighbors, having some of the celebrities mixed in with regular folk. A lot of the farmers were tricked and bribed too. It was like the Beverly Hillbillies, you know, you're gonna get rich, you know, let us frack in your backyard. But then it turns out their cows are getting sick, and so there was so much misinformation out there. And so our job as artists and community people was just to put that alternative information to counter the gas companies. And as New Yorkers, we were watching our neighboring states like Pennsylvania. They were the guinea pigs for fracking. Ohio, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, Texas. Just the history of Pennsylvania going back to coal during the Industrial Revolution, it's always it has the coal, for coal, so the oil companies had a lot of control in PA, but we watched our neighboring states be poisoned. So that united us. Of course, Pennsylvania right now has a huge problem with children with, it's an epidemic with children with cancer now. So it's a new thing that's just coming out. So,
well, thank you for that, Andrew, Nadia. Sloan, I think you have the last word.
Let's do this.
And I guess I have to apply it to you. How did community design get so big?
It's not. It's not yet.
Is it getting there?
Here's what I'll say, is that community design exists whether or not we call it to community design. So whether it's Andrew's work or Mariana's work, like these are community projects. I use community design as language to give us some sort of shared framework, but community design has been happening since the beginning of time, where people needed survival, and so they had to create a solution together, and they didn't have the resources besides each other. So I think community design in a certain way is bigger than anything, because it is the way that we come together to create solutions that make all of our lives a bit better.
Well, on that note, I want to thank Sloan, Andrew, Nadia, Dr. Watson, Mariana, Bruno Estrada. I called you Escada because I was thinking about fashion at the moment because you look so fashionable. I apologize. And Marty and all of you for coming tonight. Thank you for watching at home on Facebook Live. Thank you, SVA Theater and the Division of Continuing Education at School of Visual Arts. I hope you'll take a course with us. I'm Valerie Smaldone. Good night. Thank you.